By 1856, James Buchanan, a politician from Pennsylvania, won the election in 1856 and became our president thereafter. His presidency was marked generally with his timidity and his lack of ability to perform under pressure. That's one of the hallmarks of his presidency. He was pretty timid. And that really hurt because he was so indecisive in the face of many of these anti slavery or pro slavery movements that he gained a lot of enemies and he lost a lot of political clout on both sides. So, um, from that standpoint, he was seen as a very weak president. One of the things that took place during his presidency was the Dred Scott decision. Dred Scott was a Missouri slave whose owner took him to Illinois and Wisconsin. And when his owner died, Dred Scott, by the simple fact that his owner had taken him to Illinois and Wisconsin, which were free states which had outlawed slavery, Dred Scott filed suit against the widow of his former owner and basically was asking for his freedom. He was suing for his freedom. And his appeal was denied in various different ways, especially when the brother of the former owner got involved. Um, and one of the defenses that the brother's attorney made was that, well, since he is not a citizen, he has no legal claim to sue. He is ineligible for lawsuit. He cannot sue anyone. He's not a citizen. Hold that thought because that gets addressed shortly after the Civil War, but we'll hold that thought in a little bit. Otherwise, though, since he is not a citizen, he cannot file suit. That was the arrangement. And also, based upon the Fifth Amendment, basically it was determined that you can't take someone's property without due process of law. And since Dred Scott was not a citizen, he was somebody's property and therefore bequeathed to the widow and brother. That would be uh, threatening their property. That would be a violation of the Fifth Amendment. That was their argument. And the Supreme Court was kind of split on this issue. And President Buchanan, when he would try and weigh in on this issue, was extremely wishy washy about this. He didn't seem to want to make up his mind. Um, he would timidly address an eventual decision. The Supreme Court narrowly decided in favor of the pro slavery argument. Well, technically, it's technically correct that he is not a citizen. It is technically correct that it would be a violation of the Fifth Amendment, denying somebody's due process to keep their property. You can't take their property unduly. Well, that would technically, by definition, be a violation. So, from that standpoint, the Supreme Court sided with the pro slave argument. And President Buchanan very, 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 very timidly agreed with that decision. Okay. So, um, he tried to maybe perhaps kind of work both angles of supporting Dred Scott's decision while also supporting the idea of Kansas being admitted as a free state. You're going to upset people on both sides for two different reasons. Okay. He never wanted to seem to make up his mind. However, he would eventually pressure Congress to pass um, a various different Kansas constitutional movement, the Lecompton Constitution, which was written by the abolitionist anti-slave Kansans who did not want slavery, couldn't get it passed because there were pro-slave Kansans who were falsifying information. You have fraudulence, you have fraud rather, you have fraud, and violence. There you go. That's what I was looking for. Fraud and violence, fraudulence, new word. Um, that happened on both sides, but eventually the Lecompton Constitution in Kansas would eventually win out. And Kansas, by 1861, would formally be admitted to the United States as a state, as a free state. Okay? So, in and around this time in the late 1850s, um, one of the senatorial positions in Illinois becomes available. Okay? Um, you have two different candidates: Stephen Douglas, a known American Northern politician who had a distinguished political career. Then you had an unknown, a man from Illinois who had somewhat of a lackluster record in the Illinois legislature, in even one stint in the House of Representatives of Congress as well, um, run against Stephen Douglas. That man's name was Abraham Lincoln. And they would exchange in various different debates, debating about the slavery movement. Okay, they wanted to see where they differed on this. Douglas didn't really seem to have a moral position one way or the other. Abraham Lincoln determined that slavery was morally incorrect. Okay, um, he believed that black people were entitled to basic human rights. Okay, um, if they didn't have equal rights, then you could perhaps push unfair regulations that are unequal onto immigrant workers, or maybe perhaps poor white people. You can kind of manipulate what it means to have rights based upon status. So it is wrong to deprive people of rights. It's also wrong to enslave people. And you would have poor white laborers who are trying to improve their lot in life out west if there was perhaps maybe a loss of rights. Making a reasonably decent point in trying to spread the idea of free labor as opposed to slave labor. Okay? He wasn't an abolitionist, though. Abraham Lincoln believed that slavery was wrong, but he wasn't somebody who would ardently defend slavery with true abolitionist conviction. He wasn't that. Um, and partially, it's because Northerners themselves, even though they were anti-slavery, many Northern white people saw black people as inferior. Okay? They weren't prepared to live on equal terms with white people. And so even though Northerners, with all their abolitionist glory, um, wanted to do away with slavery, that doesn't mean they saw black people as the same. They didn't. Many prominent Northerners, if you will, also certainly didn't believe in that. Okay? So while Lincoln and other Northerners accepted the inferiority of black people, he still believed that they were entitled to basic human rights. And that's the epicenter of his argument. And when Southerners hear this, obviously they're immediately threatened. Okay, that's, yeah, um, you got part of that right, but another part of it you're way off, and obviously that would threaten the Southern economy. So, I don't know if I like that. Well, it turns out Stephen Douglas would win that senatorial election, and Abe Lincoln lost the election for senator in Illinois. That may have been the very best thing that ever happened to him. He lost the senatorial election because he gained national prominence, a national name in widely publicized debates that are actually um, patterned today. If you were ever part of a debate team in high school or in college, mock trial, debate, There are various different debate events, of which one is Lincoln Douglas debate, LD. One debater on one side, one debater on the other side. They exchange arguments and counter arguments in a particularly ordered format. That leads to others like public forum, cross examination, other different things, extemporaneous. But otherwise, so Lincoln Douglas debates would not only establish the platform for debate that you see out of modern political candidates, but it would become the norm of exchange of political ideology that would truly separate political candidates. And Abraham Lincoln was a massive beneficiary because of it. So, by the time the 1860 presidential election came around, the Democrats were widely split. And other political parties that had been in the picture, like the Know Nothings or the Whigs, they were pretty much out of the picture as well. The Democrats were split between maybe nominating Stephen Douglas or maybe John Breckinridge of Kentucky. There was another candidate named John Bell who was a constitutionalist. Um, they didn't really see a strong political candidacy out of any of them. The Republicans saw that tall, thin man from Illinois who lost a senatorial election but was an effective speaker, and he ran on the idea, as Republicans had believed, on abolishing slavery. Because one of two different things was going to happen. Either there would be all slavery or no slavery. That's what Abraham Lincoln believed. And Republicans bet on him removing it all. So the Republicans in 1860 election nominated Abraham Lincoln to be their president. And he wins. Now, it's a narrow election because there are several different candidates. He does not win a majority. He only wins like about 45% of the entire popular vote. But he had enough electoral votes to be declared the winner. Southerners immediately see Abraham Lincoln's victory in the 1860 election as a direct threat on their way of life, economically and otherwise. Their peculiar institutions now threatened. Abraham Lincoln, he doesn't favor slavery. He's not necessarily an abolitionist, but he definitely wants to force the issue. Southerners see the writing on the wall. They see perhaps a death knell of their entire existence because you have a president who's perhaps going to remove slavery altogether. So, many Southerners begin to take up the idea of seceding from the Union, doing away and breaking away and creating disunion. Hold that thought, because one of the world's bloodiest and most bitter wars is going to be fought because of it. And it's right here in America. See you next chapter.